This episode is brought to you by my latest book, The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture. It's been endorsed by many exceptional leaders and coaches, one of those being 2022 NBA Coach of the Year, Monty Williams, who called it a special book with inspiring stories, applicable strategies, and a proven model for developing team culture. This book is more than just a collection of practical tools for leaders. It teaches a proven framework that some of the world's best organizations and teams use. It's packed with real-life examples and case studies that show you how these ideas can be implemented in any context. Whether you're a coach, manager, or leader, you'll find invaluable insights to help you build the culture you want. Don't miss out on this opportunity to transform your team. Visit myculturesystem.com to learn more about the book, or you can get your copy on Amazon or Audible today.
Well, JP, when we look at the calendar, it is a season of trepidation for some coaches that are in the off season and thinking ahead, looking to next year. And one of the first things that we think about beyond our systems and our strategies and where we're going to plug players into what roles is what is leadership going to look like on our team next year? Well, you and I have conversations with coaches all the time, and here are some common phrases for coaches that are a little bit worried about what things might look like coming into next season. We hear, our seniors, we just don't have a senior class that's got a strong leader. There's no strong leaders in this group. Or this group has always coasted on their ability, and now we're going to ask them to set the standard, and all of a sudden, it's always been the class in front of them, or it's always been the best player that just graduated that set the tone, and now we're going to rely on these guys over here. And they just shake their head in disgust. One of the ways that this lack of leadership often manifests itself, and we hear coaches say this all the time, we don't have leaders that are going to hold each other or our team accountable. Practices or games, when they need somebody to get on them, we just don't have that voice in the gym. And so what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, is that all that leadership is just players holding each other accountable? Or is there more to it than that? Is there more that our leaders can give us? And how do we engage our players to help develop leaders when we may not have the natural born leader in our program year in and year out?
Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm your host, JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better culture. In addition to this podcast, I'm the founder of TOC, which provides one-on-one coaching and consulting for leaders. Learn more about us at tocculture.com. This episode is brought to you by the TOC newsletter. Every Thursday, our newsletter includes two things you don't want to miss out on. Firstly, the notes to that week's podcast episode. Whether you're listening while driving the car, out for a run, or doing the dishes, we don't want you to miss the biggest takeaways from each episode. Secondly, each newsletter is a short article from myself or Nate on leadership and culture. These articles are designed to inspire, encourage, and provide practical insights into leadership and culture building. Our content is a perfect fit for anyone who wants to stay up to date with the latest trends and insights in culture building. You can subscribe to the newsletter at tocculture.com or by clicking on the link in the details of each episode. Well, Nate, I want to start today talking about the ways that we try to develop leaders and address this leadership void within our team that doesn't work. And I know that doesn't work from personal experience, many of these things. And first off is complaining. We know that doesn't really fix anything, and just lecturing and giving out to our players. Or even what I see now more and more is coaches taking to Twitter to, passively aggressively tweet about today's generation and what, have these very kind of attacking type tweets that you just wonder, man, I wonder how that makes the players feel that are reading their coach make these messages on social media. But I also see, and I've done them before, and it's not that they're bad and there's no value in them, but like book studies or classroom sessions on leadership. These are things I've invested in and done with my team. And we've seen fruit from some of those investments and those things. But at the end of the day, they haven't been really transformational. They haven't made the big difference. And you know what? The amazing thing is, it isn't just in sports, it's not just our team. I remember in 2016, I actually read an article in the Harvard Business Review by a woman named Deborah Rowland, and it was titled, "Why Leadership Development Isn't Developing Leaders." And I was fascinated about it because at the time I was trying to teach my players how to be better leaders by bringing them into a classroom and doing book studies and having leadership type lessons. And here she talks about how that's actually what's going on in the business world. They would try to bring, leaders on a weekend retreat and train them up and then throw them back into the system that was broken. Right. And I just so connected with this article because I saw very similar approaches to what I was doing and what businesses were doing, but also because she gave some really great suggestions. And her four suggestions, I just want to cover them really quickly here. The first is that we need to make it experiential. And she talks about how like leadership is a skill to be developed and people need reps, right? So they need experience doing it. The second thing she recommends for leadership development is that the participants, the people that are being trained, they experience a change in their being, not just their doing. They're not just learning certain skills or tools to implement, but they actually go through a personal transformation themselves. The third thing she recommends is that we place the development into its wider context within the organization. So you can't just train them up in that moment, but we have to make sure that the system, the organization is allowing them to apply maybe some of the things and the concepts that we're doing through actual training throughout the whole season or the year, right? So that there's constant reviews, there's reflections on what's going on within their leadership, maybe what are they doing, what could they have done differently. Like we're actually training them. And the fourth thing ties back into that training through the experience that's built within the organization or the team, which is that we as the other leaders trying to train them as coaches, we act less like experts and more like Sherpas, kind of guiding them. And I love that example because I think so often I might sit the player down and say, hey, you're not doing a good job as a leader, or hey, we need you to do this. And I would just come in as the expert on leadership, telling them what they need to do instead of actually acting as this guide, which is asking questions, being curious and kind of helping them to come to greater awareness around how they're currently doing and helping empower them to make decisions and lead them to a place where they can make, better decisions and take action to better, be better leaders within the team. And so I've often used her framework there for everything that I've done around leadership development within teams since. And I know that we're going to dive into a lot of those practical ways in today's conversation.
And in a lot of ways, I think that's so similar to how we build players and how they learn things on the court. If I want to make better basketball players this summer, I'm not having them read a book about Steph Curry shooting threes. I'm having them shoot threes, in order for them to build that skill. And I think we need to apply the same kind of philosophy to helping our leaders to be able to develop. And that becomes the challenge, right? Is how can we create opportunities for them to practice and to learn experientially, like you just described there. Now, before we get into some of those sort of practical things, I think it's important for coaches to just take a minute and think about what exactly do you want from your leaders? Some coaches, when they think of leadership, are looking for players to be an extension of their voice. They want players to be the ones that get after the team when they're not giving a great effort or they blow an assignment or they're not paying attention in the classroom or in film. Some coaches want leaders that are going to participate in decision making, that are going to be part of putting the schedule together or the practice plan together. Some coaches just want captains that are going to take care of the off the court issues. Coach K talked about in one of his books that his most enjoyable seasons were the ones where he just got to coach basketball because the team took care of the rest. And there are some coaches, JP, that just think of their captains as who walks up to the referee before the game, and they don't really have any expectations for their role beyond that.
When I hear you list off those things, Nate, I think a lot of those things, whatever is the top of a list for a coach on one of those things that you just mentioned, I think that's oftentimes very much influenced by our own experience. Maybe it was the type of leader that we were on our team or the type of leader that maybe we've coached in the past that made our job easier or the team more successful, right? And so we get this idea of the ideal leader. And then we instantly, everyone after that now needs to fit that mold. We see Tim Duncan with the San Antonio Spurs, one of the greatest leaders of all time. Or we read a book like The Captain's Class, and we're reading about these other great team leaders, and we think all of a sudden, that's who I've got to make them be. And the reality is there's a variety of potential leaders on our team that are there, but they're going to take a lot of effort to develop. And who they end up becoming as a leader may not be that ideal leader that we have in our mind. And so I think we need to break a little bit from that, that's this ideal leader mold that we oftentimes create. Now, Nate, I know you've been coaching 20 something years now, and you've had a lot of experience. You've had a lot of great leaders, but really what is that vision of a leader for you now? Like when you look at the players that are coming through your program and what you're trying to develop.
Well, JP, I think my view of what we want from our leaders, our player leaders, has really evolved a lot over the years. And the phrase that I really have landed on since starting here at Mount Vernon is that we really want players that can participate in the co-creation of an environment and an experience that it's working with the coaches, and together we're trying to create something that's enjoyable, something that makes us better, something that makes us more competitive. But it isn't just responding to coaches' directives. It isn't just carrying the water for coach. It's an actual, it's a legitimate participation in the decision-making process, in the planning process, and in the execution of those plans, where our captains are working almost in a role that's similar to being another assistant coach in order to co-create something great for everybody. And I think that's unique. I've never really heard that phrase used before when it comes to what's leadership look like on your team. But to me, that encapsulates kind of all the things that we do and all the things that we expect of our leaders is their participation in working with us collaboratively to create something that's great for everyone.
Yeah, Nate, I think that vision of a leader with it that you just kind of painted there, I think that's beautiful. I think that's ideal towards what we're trying to create, because at the end of the day, that's going to help move the culture forward. It's going to help to create that incredible experience that we want for our team, that we know that we can't do by ourselves. Like when I look at the coaches I've worked with and the years that things go really, really well, it's because we have success developing and empowering leaders in the ways that you were just talking about there. And the number one way that we've done that is through a leadership system that coaches often term the captain's council or the leadership council. And what this leadership system does is it creates structure that takes a group of individuals within our team and empowers them, trains them, clearly communicates different expectations for them based upon their skills. Now, some coaches I know they might say, "Well, I want to train everyone on my team to be a leader." The reality is, in my experience, and I've read a lot on this, is that not everybody has the capacity every season to be a leader on your team. You have to focus on a few individuals. The other thing I think is important to mention is certain coaches, there's the people that we really want to be the leaders of our team. They have the qualities, they have the desire, but they don't maybe necessarily have the social capital or influence. And then there's the people with a lot of the influence and the social capital that maybe don't have the qualities of the character that we want. The beautiful thing about this leadership system is that you can take a mix of people, those with social influence and capital, right? And those with maybe those leadership qualities, you can bring them together and you can really work with them in a variety of ways through the leadership system. And at the core of the leadership system, captain's council, leadership council, whatever you call it, is that you clarify what are the responsibilities. Now, these responsibilities are not the traditional responsibilities that captains might be given of pick out the team shoe for the year, for instance, is which I used to do for years, right? Oh, the captains get to pick the team shoe and pick out the sweats, and all the team gear. No, their responsibilities are coming back to you, some of your vision of a leader, that they're going to meet with the coach every week and sit down and have a conversation and talk about the team and what's going on, right? These are their responsibilities. They're responsible to lead potentially a unit. They're going to look after 3 or 4 of their teammates. Within this, leadership system, you also identify the qualities and the behaviors, and you get your players to do that. Hey, what do we need out of a player leader this year? And so you have this job description that helps paint this picture, right, of what you need, and it makes it really clear so that when people are on there, they have a totally different idea of actually what might be expected of them, because they've probably been on other teams where coaches have not had that vision that you have had for them, right? They just, the captain was the person that just went out there for the coin flip or to meet the referees before the game. So giving our team this leadership system that provides the framework for the development and the empowerment to all start to happen.
I think that's a crucial first step, JP, not only because it provides opportunities for the leaders to grow in very specific responsibilities, as you described there, but it also provides some role definition in the idea that, as you said, I'm not going to have a team of 20 leaders next year. If I could have 3 strong leaders and 17 strong followers, I think we can be in pretty good shape. And when you develop a system, no matter what that looks like, you're starting to clarify, here are the captains and here are their roles and here's what's expected of them and here's how they serve the team and here's how they aid the coaches. And if you're not a captain, then here's how you follow in this structure. Here's what's expected of you. If you have a concern or a frustration, you can go to the captain. The captain takes it to the captain's council. If you're not sure about your role, you talk to the captain. Like it creates role definition for some of those things. And honestly, JP, I've seen where there have been seniors who aren't on the leadership council. And this definition of just be a great follower, set a great example, be a good teammate is almost a relief for them because they don't feel like they have to carry a greater responsibility that they don't necessarily really want, even if they are, the oldest players in the gym. One of the challenges that I've seen over the years, just with our own players, as leaders start to emerge, particularly going into that senior year or going into the new position of being the point guard, as an example, is that if they haven't been the central voice of that class before, but now their position either as a captain or as a leader on the floor requires them to be able to make calls or to get things organized or players to listen to them, the easiest way to describe it. How do we help them to grow in that voice? In the past, we've just expected players to follow them because that's what we told them was going to happen. The point guard's going to make the calls, make sure you listen to the point guard. But it doesn't mean that she's always comfortable relaying those calls and making those connections on the court, what have you. So a couple things that we've done just to help them get used to this idea is, one, we created Group Me in the summer. All right. So we have workouts and open gyms and we got scrimmages and we've got all kinds of reminders because kids can't remember anything. And rather than me blasting those out all the time, we created Group Me that's players only. And whatever voice I'm trying to develop, last year it was our point guard Cam. This year it's going to be our leader of leaders, Peyton. She's the one that is broadcasting the reminders. And so what happens is, hey, remember we have scrimmage at 4 on Sunday, be here by 3:30. Peyton's going to put that into the Group Me. If players aren't sure what's going on, typically they will start to text Peyton or Cam or whoever that leader is instead of just texting me directly. So in this little simple way, we're starting to train Peyton's voice and the team to go to Peyton so that she can start to practice some of that interaction. And if the team doesn't know or she's not sure, now she's coming to me, Coach, what time are we supposed to? Do you want me to post this thing? She's starting to take a little bit more responsibility there too. It's the simplest thing in the world. And this is going to sound crazy, JP, but I think that more than anything else with our 2 leaders that developed into just outstanding captains last year, that was one of the best things that we did to help them establish themselves for last year's team. And I think there are other ways to be able to find opportunities for those players to have a voice. Maybe, again, for us, we have workouts in August and we're not allowed to have coaching contact. We expect our seniors to figure out what they want to do in, those open gym workouts, but it's their voice, right? And so the more we can get them to practice before it really matters when the season starts, the better position they are to lead once we get going during the regular season.
Another way that I've seen coaches really enhance that is to create communication the other way. So now, not only is the captain communicating to the players, but if they're looking after units, like a lot of our teams do, is they, each captain is kind of looking after 3 or 4 players. Is if the player has something come up, oftentimes they, especially in the offseason, they might communicate just to the captain the reason for missing, and the captain will then relay that message to the coach, right? And that's just a great way to kind of create peer-to-peer accountability and help those captains to learn the frustrations oftentimes when your teammates, don't communicate, where they are or any issues, right? It's giving them some of those real experiences. I think the other thing that really enhances what you're talking about there, and you kind of referenced this, is bringing them into the decision that then they communicate. And so a simple thing like this might be, it's a Friday night practice and you got a game on Saturday. You got to be there by 1, and you're kind of deciding with your coaches, like, what time do we want to get them here? What do we got to do? How are we feeling? Just bringing your captains over for that type of like kind of powwow discussion around your planning, your structure of the day, and saying, well, what do you think? Where do you want to stop for food, or what's the plan here? Like, what's the curfew tonight? Like, just bringing them into those and then saying, okay, hey, do you mind going, like, you guys go and now communicate that to the team. Here's the curfew for tonight. We need to be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow. And this is why we need to be here at 8 o'clock. We're going to be there at 1. Whereas if you come in and you communicate all those messages, there might be that initial resistance from all the players, but now the captains not only understand why you've made those decisions, but they've been part of that. And now they get to go and communicate that. And you can do that with so many different things within your program. And it will increase the buy-in. I just call them little captains huddles, right? They're just little leadership huddles where you can do them on the fly, especially when there's maybe a change in the plans or you're just really uncertain around what your team needs. This episode is brought to you by the Culture System online training platform. It's the ultimate resource for coaches who want to become more transformational and build winning team cultures. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your coaching to the next level, our one-of-a-kind online training platform is designed to help you learn the Culture System framework at your own pace. Through this course, I'll share with you the proven methods, tools, and strategies used by some of the best teams and organizations in the world. You'll get access to customizable digital tools and a group chat to engage with experienced coaches and apply the 4-part framework throughout your season. With the Culture System online training, you'll be inspired and transformed through the stories and lessons of real leaders who've successfully applied these methods and tools within their organizations. You'll gain a deeper commitment to transformational coaching and be equipped with the tools and strategies you need to build a great team culture. To get access to this course today, simply go to tocculture.com and click on the online course tab, or click on the link provided in the details of this episode. Don't miss this opportunity to become a more transformational coach and take your team to the next level with the Culture System online training platform.
I think another area where it's important to be able to develop your leader's voice is when they're relaying information back to the coaching staff. I think back to my first year at Mount Vernon, we did a captain's council, and they'd never been part of that before. They've never been served by captains in that way, and no one had ever been part of a weekly meeting with the coaches to talk about the schedule and what's upcoming, and for the players to provide some feedback to the coaching staff. So we start meeting on Saturday mornings every week during the season, and I'd sort of lay out, here's what I'm looking at this week. Here's what I'm thinking about for our mental health day. Here's what I'm thinking for our practice schedule. Here's what I think we should be working on. Here's some reflections on how last week went. And I'm constantly asking for feedback. What do you think about this? What do you think we need here? What are your thoughts on if we do it this way? And for most of those meetings, especially early in the year, it was crickets. It was a lot of nodding and smiling, and that makes sense, coach, and not much beyond that. And I think part of that is because they've just never experienced the opportunity to give feedback in that way before. Well, now you fast forward to year 2, players have now seen kind of how this structure works that you referenced before, where if a player is confused or they're frustrated or the team is tired, they realized after their experience in year 1 that you can take that to the captains, they'll take that to the coaches, and the coaches will do something about it, or at least there'll be a conversation about how to make things better. And so now in my second year of weekly meetings, where we had 2 new captains and 1 captain that was a junior the year before and is now in her second year on the leadership council, I'm asking the same questions. Is there any drama? How's the team doing? What do you think about the schedule here, etc.? And they're starting to give me more feedback. They're starting to be a little bit more open about if the team's frustrated with something or they want to do something differently. I'm starting to hear more and more of that coming out. And so what I've learned in this process is that the more opportunities we can give those leaders to reflect either on something that just happened or thinking ahead to things that are going to happen, things that are going to happen in our schedule, and just giving them the ability to give some feedback, either from their perspective or the team's perspective, the more they do it, the more comfortable it becomes. The more comfortable they become, the more information I get. And the more information that I get from them, the better decisions I start to make as a coach.
Yeah, what you're talking about there is just building trust over time. And so often coaches will say to me, JP, they're just telling me what they think I want to hear. And it takes time to get to that place. And so when they do tell you something that you don't want to hear, make sure that you embrace that message and you don't have this big emotional response, and you really appreciate that feedback or this decision that they've made that may not align with your decision. That's a really important piece. And when you've built that trust, when you build that trust, now you can take that into some other really powerful areas of your program. And that's just through your reflection process. When you play a game, when you have a practice, bring your leadership council, your group in and saying, "Hey, what did you guys think went well today? What didn't go so well? What do you think we need to work on?" They're going to start to give you really good insights. And you may not agree with all of them, but it's going to at least tell you where your team's at, what your team's thinking after that loss or that win or that hard practice where you may have tried something new. Maybe you implemented a new offense, a new defense. Maybe you push them and challenge them in a new way. And you hear they're going to give you feedback on what the team is feeling and what is thinking. But you've got to build trust, but trust takes time. I think that's just such a huge component of it.
We're talking about trust sort of being the currency that makes this whole thing work. You also have to consider, not only are you developing trust with your leaders that they can come to you with thoughts and concerns or feedback, but that is also developing trust in the leaders from the rest of the team, that the team can go to them and feel like, oh yeah, my concerns are going to be brought to the coaches and that there's going to be a productive conversation there. So I think that whole model, it breeds trust in all directions, right? Which makes this whole co-creation process possible.
So I read the book of Joe recently. It's about Joe Maddon, a phenomenal book, talking about his time, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, the Chicago Cubs, to the Angels, and just his management style and his philosophy. And he's a great manager. He's won a couple World Series. And I really, really enjoyed it. But I love this concept he has, and he's taken it to every organization he's coached at. And that is, let the lead bulls run, is his kind of principle. So he identifies who are the lead bulls, and it kind of comes back to this story around the Native Americans and how they would often hunt buffalo. They'd identify the lead bull and they would direct the lead bull towards the cliff, and then all the buffalo would run off the cliff, and then they'd have easy killing, right? So his whole idea is, I just need to identify the lead bulls, right? The influencers of my team, the people that have potential leadership qualities or capacity, and I'm going to bring them into a room early in the year, and we're going to decide the policies for this team. He does not a rules guy. So I equate policy with standards. How do we want to do things here? Now, Maddon has a list of, say 15, 20 areas that are really important. The policies around the locker room, the policies around travel, the policies around this. And he presents the policy, like this area, but he lets the lead bulls decide on it. And his whole thing is, I really don't care what the policy is, as long as we're all in agreement on it, and as long as it is in line with our vision to win a World Series and to have a heck of a lot of fun doing that. And I think that is just a really cool way to set your team standards. I know that's a very common activity, and I talk about it in my book, The Culture System. And it maybe doesn't even need to be done with all the players. It's just bringing our leadership group in, having them set some of those standards, and then communicate that to the rest of the team. And I've seen a few coaches do that over the years, and it is effective. And I don't encourage coaches, if you do this with your leaders, don't just focus on the policies or the standards, but have conversations around the potential consequences, right? The natural ones that might occur if we don't follow those, but also, hey, how do you want me to hold you accountable? How might you actually help to hold your teammates accountable? And it's probably the piece that people don't do. That's honestly, if they don't do it, then there's really no agreement on the really difficult part of the standards, which is the enforcement piece. So once again, you bring them into the decision-making process, builds trust. Coach cares about what we think. He's actually empowering us and allowing us to set the policies, which were before, dictated from on high, from every other coach that they've experienced. And so this starts to drastically change the dynamics of that relationship.
Well, I think that's great, JP, in bringing your leaders into the conversation about the consequences for not meeting a standard or what you expect from the coaches in those situations. If you're looking for opportunities to give your leaders a chance to practice their voice, Another thing that you can do right in line with that is just giving the leaders, the captains, an opportunity to fix something first. In other words, we've told many stories on the podcast in the past about having a bad practice and pausing, and calling a timeout or throwing the kids out of the gym and just putting it on the captains or the leaders or the seniors. You guys get 2 minutes to figure this out and fix it. Otherwise, I'm going to fix it. And you're probably not going to like the way that I'm going to go about it. And I think that once again reinforces the role of the leaders, the expectation that everyone's going to follow them, that they're going to figure this out together, and we're going to try to move forward. But it's a great opportunity for them to practice. If you're looking for other little things, I know that there's all kinds of times where in a team building session or a team dinner, we do little games here and there. We've done shooting Olympics. We've talked about that on the podcast before. We put players in teams and they have to do a little skit and they compete against each other in these shooting drills over winter break. Just making little team leaders in these little random units of 4 or 5 that are going to compete against each other. We've done it with shooting. We've done it with catchphrase. We've done it with dice games, and just letting your juniors and seniors or your potential leaders have a little tiny responsibility in some kind of team building thing. Those are micro ways of starting to introduce them to the idea of leadership as well, and shouldn't be overlooked because I do think that there's value even in those little opportunities.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of go back to, you were talking about that example of, empowering them to kind of like support and even hold their teammates accountable in practice. I mean, I think away from practice, off the court or off the field, we can do this as well. And one way to do this, and it's, some people may disagree with me on this, um, is in conversations with them around other players. For instance, if you have a player that's struggling, maybe they're not playing really well late and they're a bit of a slump. Maybe they're struggling to meet standards. They're not showing up on time, or their effort's been poor. Or maybe you're sensing something with mental health and you just really haven't been able to maybe connect or really learn what's going on there. Sitting down and saying, "Hey, what do you know about this player? What's going on? Is there something I'm missing?" Right? What can you do to help support them in this moment? They just, dropped out of the starting lineup. How can you support them? They're struggling to show up on time. How can you help them? Right? And really working with them in those moments, as well as when consequences have to get involved. Now, some people would say don't do this, but if I think you're clearly communicating how you're going to use this leadership council, especially in years 2 and 3, when it starts to really get momentum, you can bring in your leadership council and you can say, "Hey, we've got an issue." And coaches have used this to great effect that I've worked with. They say, "Well, what do you think the consequence should this be for this player? Having shown up late for the team bus, or done so and so, or for different situations." And when we bring them into that conversation, oftentimes they come up with actually really creative, not just consequences, but like really solutions to the problem that are going to help to regain trust with that player that oftentimes has broken trust with the team.
Well, JP, as we get ready to wrap up here, I just want to add 2 more things here. Number one, our friend Tyler Costin has another great method of helping players to develop their voice. And he talks about in his training having players deliver messages on his behalf. In other words, if I'm trying to get my seniors to be a little bit more comfortable being extroverted or connecting with certain players or getting used to their voice, I might say, "Hey, JP, would you just go remind Aaron that he's got to get a better box out on the backside there? And then you got to run off and deliver the message." Or it doesn't always have to be a nagging reminder. It can also be, "Hey, JP, I'm at the other end of the floor here. Will you remind Aaron that was one hell of a box out down there? Great job getting into him." And you just send him, as your courier, sort of scurrying along the way to deliver that message. I think that interpersonally can start to facilitate some different connections, and players kind of get used to giving some of that informative feedback that can be really useful. And it starts with you, but eventually they start to grow into doing that on their own. The last thing that I would share with coaches when it comes to how are we finding ways to give our players repetitions in leadership, this comes all the way back to something that you shared early in the beginning. Not every leader is going to look the same. Both comparing this year to last year, this year's seniors compared to one another. I think one of the most important things that we do when it comes to developing leaders is we have conversations with our kids about what are they most confident doing. in a leadership role? Where do they feel that they have the most influence on their teammates? Are there areas that they want to grow in when it comes to their leadership responsibility? In other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to identify their strengths and then provide opportunities for them to lean into that. I think sometimes we bang our heads against the wall trying to get an introvert to be an extrovert in practice, and it just isn't worth it's just not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. When we could instead try to leverage the fact that they do have some pretty good one-on-one relationships with players, how can we leverage those into greater influence, even if it's not in front of the whole team? And just starting to think through with those players, what do you do best? What are you most confident doing? How do you have the greatest influence? What's your biggest impact on this team? And how can we create more opportunities for you to do those things? Makes them more comfortable. It builds their confidence, and it helps me to figure out ways to multiply their leadership more quickly because, again, we're working together to leverage their strengths for the benefit of all.
And to Nate's point about how you want to maximize the strengths of the leaders or the potential leaders that you have on your team, the Leadership Council or the Captain's Council, it's the system to help you do that. And if you want to learn more about the Leadership Council and how to implement it and use it to enhance your culture and develop leaders, there are two ways to learn more. First, it's at the core of the culture system framework that I present in my book, The Culture System. So you can purchase the book and read it if you haven't already done so. But also, if you really want to be trained up in it, as well as get some resources to help simplify the execution, then you should check out the Culture System online training. It goes deeper than the book, as well as it gives you round-the-clock support where you can reach out via text to myself, Nate, and other coaches as you encounter challenges throughout the year. To learn more about the course, go to tocculture.com. Thanks for listening in to today's episode. If you found it valuable, please share it with friends and on social media. Subscribe to our podcast and leave us a nice review as well if you appreciate the work we put into it.